What does success and determination look like for bears and salmon? Maybe it comes in different forms. Mother bears find success through their ability to raise and wean their cubs. Yet female bears, like their male counterparts, certainly experience a sense of satisfaction with a belly full of nutritious food. And that's got to be a form of success. Among juvenile bears, such as maturing subadults, determination and success could be fighting through the difficulties that you face without mother's guidance. Certainly, success could be establishing your own home range or developing the strength and skill to catch your own salmon. For salmon, determination is expressed through the effort necessary to reach your spawning site. Perhaps success is best exemplified at journey's end, when you die as a triumphant spawner and give back to the ecosystem that allowed you to thrive. Welcome to another year of Anan Creek Bear Cams, brought to you by Tongass National Forest, friends of the Tongass, and explore.org. Hi everyone, my name is Mike Fitz. I'm your resident naturalist with explore.org. Bears and salmon at Anan Creek must use all their determination if they're to find their own versions of success. And to help us introduce us to Anan Creek and the stories to follow this summer as the bears and salmon work towards their goals, I'm joined by my two co-hosts today. First, let me welcome in Jen Cardiac, the Field and Program Manager at Anan Wildlife Observatory. How are you doing today, Jen?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I always appreciate the chance to talk about Anan, the bears, and our amazing public lands that make it all possible. I am the Field and Program Manager, as you said, at Anan, and I've been privileged to work at two different bear viewing areas, one being Steep Creek at Mendenhall, which has black bears, and then at Pack Creek, which has brown bears. And now Anan is the best of both worlds since it has both brown and black bears. I started here in 2022 as a seasonal temp and then became manager the next year. And I love it out here.
It is absolutely a unique place. And we're going to get into some of the details of why that is. And it's just not because of the bears, but it also has an exceptional salmon run as well. And that's why we have Anna Belbeck with us as well. Anna is a biological technician with the Tongass National Forest who focuses on salmon. Anna, great to have you here for the program.
Thank you for having me. Hey everyone, my name is Anna Belbeck and I grew up in Southeast Alaska, where my dad had a career as the assistant manager at a salmon hatchery. And for the majority of my childhood, we actually lived at the site of the hatchery. So I'm deeply familiar with the life cycle of salmon and the crucial role that they play in the ecology and culture here. I began working as a biological technician for the Forest Service with a focus in fisheries back in 2023.
And we'd like to remind our audience that if you have questions for us about bears and salmon, the Tongass National Forest, drop those in the chats. We have a moderator helping us to gather those questions. I see there's already a couple of questions in our queue. We'll wait for just a little bit to answer those. They are salmon focused, so we have a few minutes, I think, before we're going to get into that. But for many people, Anan seems like a place of isolation and remoteness. Certainly it takes a lot of time to get to, even maybe for local individuals. You got to make an effort to get there. But for bears and salmon who make it their home, Jen, it's probably the center of the universe. So where is the Anan Wildlife Observatory and what characteristics make it such rich habitat for bears and salmon?
So the Anan Wildlife Observatory is in Southeast Alaska, about 30 miles from Wrangell. It's part of the Tongass National Forest, which is our largest national forest. In the Tongass, 93% of watersheds remain in pristine, near natural conditions, which help sustain massive salmon runs. And Anan Creek is home to one of the largest runs of pink salmon in Southeast Alaska, which helps support the high density of black bears and a smaller population of brown bears that gather here. And Anan is one of the few places in the world where both brown and black bears can be seen fishing in the same creek. And it's a pretty special thing to witness.
Our ability to enjoy the webcams at Anan is the result of a special partnership between the National Forest, between local schools, and the Friends of Anan, because we have webcam technicians with explore.org that help to maintain and install our camera system. But basically, the majority of the work is done by local students from schools. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so a few years ago, the observation deck at Anan needed to be replaced due to like structural issues. And the old deck did have a camera, but it just went to a small monitor on the deck. And so the new design for the new deck included plans for solar panels and cameras for a more advanced system. And the Forest Service had previously partnered with T3. It's the T3 Alliance, Teaching Through Technology. It's an organization that engages Alaskan students in STEM projects. And we'd worked with them on smaller projects, so we decided to reach out to them for this. It felt like an incredible opportunity for the students and for us. The students helped design and research the system, with Explore.org providing technical support along the way, but it was the students and their mentors who were the boots on the ground, installing the equipment and maintaining it over the years. The project has given them real world experience on this large scale effort. And it's super exciting to talk with the students and show them the viewership statistics so they can see the worldwide reach of their work. And watching them troubleshoot different challenges and stay invested in the project is genuinely inspiring. And it's definitely a non-traditional approach, but it allows the Forest Service to support local youth and community by giving them access to these high-level, meaningful projects that they might not otherwise experience in high school. So it's a win-win all around.
And it's certainly a useful skill to be able to wire things together,
Yes.
to be able to understand how electricity works, solar panels. I mean, those things are going to be used more and more as we go forward. So we're thankful for the work of those students because we can now share the Anan cameras and Anan Creek with the world. It's a tough job to install it and to design it. But in speaking of tough jobs, imagine that you are a salmon who has been hounded by predators nearly your whole life, yet you remained determined to reach your spawning site. Anan Creek is home to one of Southeast Alaska's most abundant salmon runs, giving us the chance to observe the determination of these fish in the face of challenging conditions. Along the way, salmon become what I consider to be a gift for the ecosystem and the organisms that reside there. Anna, can you introduce us to the salmon that use Anan Creek? I understand that there's one species that's far more abundant than the others, but it's a pretty diverse suite of species that visit and use it.
Yeah, so technically all 5 Pacific salmon species are in Anan Creek and Anan Lake. But the main run, as you said, is pink salmon. And pink salmon have a shorter life cycle than other species of salmon, like the king salmon. So they come in to spawn as adults, like in this picture here. And those eggs incubate over the winter, and then they hatch. And by the next spring, those baby fish are out migrating out into the ocean, where they have to, as you said, avoid lots of predators, not only in the stream that they are born in, but as soon as they enter that ocean, man, do they have to face a lot of predators. They're out there for like 1 to 2 years, and they come right back. They are not as big as other salmon species. They're kind of the smallest ones, but they're really abundant at Anan Creek. So they come back in large numbers. And I like this video here. It shows that's a male pink salmon. They go through this metamorphosis when they come back from the salt water. Their bodies totally change. They are also nicknamed the humpy, and that's because of the big hump on their back. Yeah, they're truly a beautiful fish, and because of their abundance, it allows for the bears to truly thrive. So.
And we had an audience question related to salmon. I mean, we haven't seen salmon come into the stream yet, as far as I know. Our cameras at Anan have been live for a few days now, but we had an audience question. Somebody was wondering, when do the salmon normally start running at Anan?
Typically, it's like the end of June, so here soon, to early July, but that can vary year to year depending on lots of different conditions. Like the amount of water flow coming from the creek itself, and ocean conditions. I think last year they were a bit later than they typically would be. But yeah, we haven't seen them yet. I will say yesterday I was out and about and I did see a salmon jump in front of Wrangell. So they're starting to show up. I'd say, yeah, the next couple weeks we should probably start seeing some action down there.
I'm sure our sharp-eyed camera watchers will see the first fish for sure. And as the salmon are forcing their way upstream, they must overcome many obstacles, including many especially hungry predators. Jen, I mentioned that the salmon, they become a gift in a sense to other animals. And the importance of salmon to bears, it can seem a little obvious, right? Bears like to eat fish. It's good for them. But when we examine the details of this relationship, we find that salmon are a remarkably nutritious and energy dense food for bears.
Yeah, salmon are incredibly important. They're calorie rich, they're high in fat and protein. In contrast to what they're eating in the spring, bears are mostly eating sedges and grasses. And while new growth sedge does have protein in it, it has little fat, so bears can't gain much weight from them. And then when salmon are super abundant, bears are often eating only the most nutritious parts, like the brains, eggs, and skin, because these parts are the highest in fat and omega-3s. And so this selective feeding lets them maximize calories while minimizing effort. And since the salmon are gathered in such huge numbers in this predictable place, bears can get thousands of calories with very little energy expenditure. Like this one, he's just flat out laying on his stomach and grabs a fish. It's rare in the wild for them to get calories that easily. And all of this prepares them for hibernation. Bears enter a phase called hyperphagia in late summer and fall, where their bodies drive them to eat nonstop. And bears can gain 3 to 6 pounds per day during peak salmon season. And they need these enormous fat reserves as fuel for hibernation in order to survive months without eating or drinking. And also, these salmon-rich diets dramatically increase the likelihood of successful cub births. Female bears have delayed implantation, meaning the fertilized egg doesn't implant in the uterus right away. The embryo will only implant if the mother has gained enough fat to support pregnancy and nursing through hibernation. So in poor salmon years, females may not give birth at all. And also the fatter mothers produce richer milk, which is essential for cubs born in the den in midwinter. And then at the end of the season, the dead and dying salmon in the fall continue to feed the bears. As the salmon die off, their bodies accumulate in streams and along banks, giving bears access to a slower, easier food source when they're still trying to pack on the weight. And while these fish may not be as fresh, obviously, they're still calorie dense and easy to access. Sometimes it's a little gross watching them eat these rotted fish, but for them, it's calories. And so older bears, mothers with cubs, like this one, she just grabs some scraps. Or bears lower in the hierarchy often rely on these carcasses because that avoids conflict with dominant bears. And like this is Nugget. He was a scrappy little guy. And he was mainly just living off scraps and carcasses until all the other bears moved off and he was able to get down and go fish on his own. But this sustained him for most of the season, his first season.
And yeah, and speaking of those dead and dying salmon, Anna, another way to conceptualize the importance of salmon is to view the salmon from the perspective of the ecosystem. The determination of salmon to return to freshwater and spawn really does bring gifts and energy and nutrients, not just for bears, but for landscapes and whole watersheds.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So when we kind of zoom out and look at the ecosystem that Anan supports, we can think, okay, what else lives here? We have bald eagles, we have mink, we have gulls, we have lots of different birds like blue herons, otters, I mean, you name it, there's got to be some way that salmon influences the survival of so many different animals. The death that these salmons, the salmon, they die. Sorry, I got all mixed up there. Their death, it provides nutrients from, they collect nutrients while they're out in the ocean feeding, and they bring that really good nutrition from the ocean back to these freshwater streams where their carcasses deposit into the soil for other organisms like the trees and all the vegetation to absorb. And that also, there's animals like deer and moose that eat that vegetation. So without those salmon, those animals wouldn't be as well off. And not only that, but in Southeast Alaska, the culture here is so strong. Salmon is so important to the native people here. It still sustains subsistence lifestyles. So it's not just animals, it's also the people that are being enriched by these salmon that return every year that we can rely on.
They are truly a gift. And there's one other salmon-related question that I'm going to save towards the end of our program, because I know we plan to talk about it a little bit later on. But the salmon themselves, they're amazing organisms. The determination that they show in the face of hardship, all of this exists within the context too of a rapidly changing world. Change is an inevitable facet of life. Resilience in the wake of change or with change, depending on how you want to look at it, that does seem to be baked into the function of ecosystems. But the intact ecosystems of the Tongass Anna are well positioned to weather forces of change to the benefit of the species that make the area their home.
Yes. So Anan, and in general, Southeast Alaska has so many things to boast about. And one in particular that drives the rest of the forest is the intact ecosystem. These pristine environments serve as the ecological backbone of Southeast Alaska, sustaining massive runs of salmon. And when you compare it to other regions that salmon are native to, like the lower 48, things like the development of highways, cities, resource extraction, dams, and exploitation, all of those things have diminished the intact ecosystem. Anan Creek originates as a lake that is fed by both rainfall and snowmelt, ensuring cold water it supports a healthy salmon run. Cold and continuously flowing water is imperative for the salmon that depend on it to return to as adults to spawn, for the eggs to incubate and hatch, and for the juvenile salmon to grow large and strong enough to migrate downstream and into the ocean, where they will hopefully grow and escape their predators and mature into adult salmon. The earth is warming, and as the oceans warm along with that, they become more acidic, and oxygen levels in warmer waters go down. So salmon they're really incredibly susceptible to these changes in the environment. Acidic oceans create pH imbalances that ocean life is not really adapted to, and they're not suited for, salmon are not suited for large swings in pH. If you ever think about salmon or hear about fish and hear the term dissolved oxygen, it basically just means the oxygenation level in the water, both in fresh and salt water, that the gills in fish are able to extract from the water. Salmon need at least a minimum of 7 milligrams of dissolved oxygen per liter of water in order to grow healthy and prevent diseases. Otherwise, it can cause, low levels can cause stress and reduced growth and possibly mortality.
Well, salmon are the reason for the season, as I like to say, at Anan. Their determination to find success through spawning makes Anan Creek and the ecosystem there a richer place. If salmon are determined animals, then bears are equally determined to catch and eat them. In no small sense, success for bears means getting fat for winter hibernation. And while there are many places where bears fish for salmon, there are only a handful of spots in Alaska where bears congregate in a relatively small area, like around a waterfall, to fish for salmon. There are even fewer places where both black and brown bears fish in the same place. One of them is Anan Creek, as you mentioned, Jen. So what makes Anan Creek an attractive place for bears to fish, and why can we see both brown and black bears there?
Well, the big reason is, as we've said, that it's one of the largest pink salmon runs in Southeast Alaska. And the creek also has these large boulders that create some waterfalls and that slow the water down. And there's numerous pools for the fish to rest in before going up those falls. And that provides great fishing opportunities for the bears. And our falls aren't like brooks with the big leaping fish into the bear's mouths. Most of our bears are catching them in the shallow pools where the fish are resting, or on the sides as the fish are trying to skirt up the edges. So like if the pools are too deep, it's harder for them to catch the fish. And so the creek in certain areas, like these pools that you can see, gets shallow enough that the fish will rest there. But it's not so deep that the bears trying to catch them, they'll just be able to get away. So there's certain areas that provide the opportunity that makes catching the fish much easier. Because sometimes people will ask why they're not going to the center of the creek where you can see much more fish. And it's because in that area, they can easily get away. Whereas in the corners and around the edges, that's where they're catching the fish. And for the black bears, there's also caves from the rock slides generations ago that provide security and cover for the bear. And so a lot of times they'll take fish and then bring them into a cave to eat it and then come back out. And so that offers a level of safety for the bears as well. So I think that's what makes it, in general, an attractive place for the two species of bears.
And every bear has a special story to tell. That's the greatest reason why I keep watching them, whether that's at Anan or elsewhere, like at Brooks River and Katmai. The diversity of individual bears, along with the combination of black and brown bears at Anan, is a special opportunity to experience part of the world. So let's introduce our audience to some of the types of bears and stories that they might encounter while watching the Anan Creek bear cams. First, let's talk about the bears who have the toughest job, in my opinion, and that's the mothers. They got to eat for themselves. They got to eat for their cubs, too, and keep their cubs safe. Bear families consist of a mother bear and her dependent offspring. Male bears have no role in raising cubs. So, again, mother bears are challenged to meet the demands of their hungry cubs while eating enough food to sustain their own survival. They must stay vigilant in order to keep their cubs safe from harm. Watching mother bears in families is a study in determination, patience, and skill. Jen, those traits are especially evident in moms with first-year cubs. Their success is all the more remarkable because of the challenges that they face.
Yeah, it's always exciting to see the first-year cubs. We call them koi, which means cub of the year, springers or spring cubs. But it's always amazing to see the little cubs and to see the ones that listen and the ones that don't. Like you can tell when the mom tells the cub to stay in the cave, and then the minute she walks away, they both come out. Things like that. But we're excited to see new cubs, and we've already seen one black bear with 3 tiny small cubs that we're very excited about. And we think the mama is potentially Oso, who is very comfortable. This is Oso 2 years ago. She's very comfortable at the deck. She's very comfortable on camera. So she'll nurse right at the tree, which 2 different cameras can focus on her as she's nursing. So it's pretty special to be able to watch her nurse so close to the deck. And so it's an incredible sight, and it's great to be able to share that with the viewers this year. And it's always fun to watch the mama bears teach their cubs and watch the cubs struggle through their first life, not knowing what to do with the fish, and then later on maybe figuring it out. But they get pretty scared sometimes of the fish, and then it's just fun to watch what they're learning and what they're interested in. like this. They're just adorable.
You see it day by day. You see the cubs learning and adapting to the circumstances. And, it is a tough job for mom. Not all cubs, survive their first year. It's their vulnerability is never greater than their first spring and summer outside of the den. And we did actually get a audience question, Jen, about the survival rates of black bear cubs. Somebody wrote in and was wondering, is the survival rate of black bear cubs better than for brown bear cubs? It depends on the ecosystem that you go to, how good or bad the survival rate is for brown bear cubs. I don't remember the stats for black bear cubs. I don't know if you can pull out any off the top of your head.
The stats I know of are 50% survival rate. And I think it is very dependent on the environment that they're in. But we always, like our new employees, whenever there's cubs, they always want to name them. We don't allow cubs to be named their first year because inevitably that one of those cubs will die. Like if it's 2 cubs litter or something like that, one of them will end up dying once they're named. So we don't want to put that bad juju out there, but it's sad because you'll look at it and some days we'll be like, oh, this bear has 3 cubs, and then the next day she has only 1. You don't know what happened. Scuba Sue had 2 cubs 2 years ago, and they just disappeared, and we didn't see what happened. Sometimes we do see what happens. Sometimes we see when a cub is lost, or if something else happens, but a lot of times it happens off of camera, so we don't really know exactly what happened. But yeah, so the survival rate isn't great, but it's probably a little bit better at a place like Anan where there is such a strong food source, but it's still, the percentage isn't high.
It certainly underscores the difficulty that mother bears face in order to raise their cubs. If a cub, survives that first summer, then it's more likely than not to survive its second summer. The second summer, though, is a significant time in a bear's life. Jen, it means different things for black bears than it does for brown bears, and we'll get to see those differences manifest at Anan Creek.
Yeah, so normally black bears keep their cubs for just the one summer, and then they hibernate with them again, and they send them on their way in the spring. But we've actually had some exceptions at Anan. This is Twerp. She was named that because she is a little twerp sometimes, and she ended up sticking with her mom for 3 more summers, and wow. Her mom let her. But it's unusual. She just kept stealing fish from her mama, and the mom just let her. We also last year had Hera with her 2 yearlings. And this is Eugene, one of her yearlings, with the blonde tufts in his ears. So we're hopefully going to be able to identify him easily again this year. So that's different. But in general, black bear cubs are on their own in their second summer, trying to figure things out. Like Little Nugget, he had to figure things out. The small bear, and you hope that they'll figure it out, but they're kind of on their own. And we did have 12 black bear cubs last year survive until the fall. So we're hoping some of them come back as these subadults, because they're really fun to watch and they're really fun to root for when you see these little ones come, and they've learned some things, but they're still learning. And in contrast to brown bears, where they keep their cubs for 2 summers and sometimes 3 summers, those yearlings grow increasingly independent with their moms as they learn how to fish for themselves and they become more adventurous. And they're still under the protection of mom, but those extra summers give them a lot of extra prep for when they are on their own, and they can figure things out better because they've had an extra summer of learning from their mom.
And from a coldly logical perspective, we find that the forces of natural selection are experimenting with the length of maternal care in bears. The experiment is run between the different species, as evidenced by the average length of time a black bear cub spends with its mother compared to a brown bear cub. And then between individual bears as well, right? So they're just not like 2 summers or not just 1 summer, but there's a variety of choices, you know, quote unquote, that they make. The choice perhaps isn't something that they think about, but it explains the variation we see between families and the species. Anan Creek is a wonderful place to consider the consequences of this facet of bear life. And I love how we're able to pair our observations of actual bears with hypotheses that help explain why animals do what they do. You know, sometimes theory matches reality, sometimes it doesn't. On average, though, we see how bear families need to be skilled, cautious, and determined if they are to be successful. And then once a bear is weaned and becomes independent, it begins a new journey that is one of the most difficult that they'll ever face. One group of bears who are maybe the most apt to experiment and the most likely to make us scratch our heads, Jen, are the subadults.
Yeah. Subadults are really fun to watch. One of our favorites was Ragamuffin. She's still a subadult. She is 5 now, but when she first came around, she was super erratic. She didn't know how to fish. She would always be running around. Now she's not as nervous, and she does catch fish, although you can still see she's super young and playful, and was for a few days straight, she wasn't fishing. She was just playing with whatever sticks she could find in the creek, which it's so cute. And so they still have the playfulness as part of them, even though she's gotten a little bit more serious about fishing and is way less erratic and nervous. We also have another subadult cricket. He's a little black bear, so cute. He was a small black bear, and he became like our informal trailhead mascot for most of the summer. He was he would hang around the trailhead where we give safety talks, maybe because he felt comfortable there. We're not really sure, but there would be a lot of people, and we would usually bears will move off, but we kind of suspect that Cricket might be one of Oso's cubs from the previous year, because Oso is very comfortable around the trailhead as well as the deck. And by the end of last season, Cricket had made his way up to the falls, so we're hoping we see more of him at the deck and on the cameras, because he's a little cutie and still figuring things out. And Nugget's one of our other subadults that stole everyone's hearts 2 years ago when he showed up. He was tiny, he was a little scraggly with like little red dreadlocks. He was a scrappy little guy. And then by the end of next year, he had come a long way and was fishing alongside some of the largest black bears in the creek, when the previous year he had only gotten scraps. And this is BB next to him. He's so much bigger than him. So it's a surprise that BB didn't mind that he was standing there. But so he showed a lot of spirit and didn't receive much pushback from the big guys, even though he was fishing in the middle of the creek, which is normally reserved for the bigger bears.
He's great.
Mm-hmm.
I love to see it. You know, those bears exemplify an idea like change. Not only are their bodies growing rapidly, they're developing their personalities, they're experimenting with different behaviors, they're exploring their world. This is a time of life when bears are really determined to extend their horizons in more ways than one. And one of the special things about the cameras is that maybe we'll get a chance to watch a bear like Cricket or Nugget grow up into be a really big, successful adult. And we can remember and we can point back to those stories. It would be like, hey, remember when this bear really had a rough go at it, or when it was struggling, trying to survive? So I'm looking forward to seeing how these stories kind of play out over time. You know, one of the questions when we're gonna get into adult bears here in just a second, Jen, is kind of a question that's related to cubs, though, in bear families as much as it is to adults. Somebody wrote in and was wondering, is it true that that only brown bears that we see on the cams are female bears or sows?
Yeah, it's interesting. That actually goes into, so where I've worked before, Pat Creek and Mendenhall, those were mainly female oriented, because females will choose to be around humans so that they can have protection against the males. And at Anan, we have a lot of male black bears, which was a surprise when I first got there, seeing how many males we had. But looking at the brown bears, most of them are females. We'll have some transient male brown bears walking through, but none to where we've learned to identify them enough to name them and to have them where they're one of the regulars at the site. And we've seen them because we'll be out there in the beginning of like May doing trail work and stuff. And when we see them, we'll see more males during that time sometimes. But during the season, we don't have as many males. We're wondering, potentially the Upper Falls might, if we ever get a camera up there, be interesting to find out if more males go there. Because it's males in general, and this is just situation, but a lot of them don't like to be around people, so they'll choose to avoid those areas. But that's not true for our black male bears, so it doesn't always follow.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know with brown and grizzly bears, it does seem like the adult males are the ones that are less likely to habituate to the presence of people. I don't know what it is, if it's tied to that Y chromosome or something, but they can adapt to people. Many of them do, but not all of them. There's a higher percentage of male bears that just don't. So it's really interesting to think about how that works at Anan. But keep watching the cameras. Again, we encourage our audience, so if you see a male brown bear at the falls, maybe it's at a different time of the day where people aren't there, that's noteworthy for sure.
Totally. Like, because we don't let people up the trail before 8, and they have to come back down by 6 p.m. because we know there's bears that use the site and want to use the site when there's no people around. So we leave those time frames for the bears that don't want to be around people. So potentially that's when more male bears might come around. We're not sure.
Watching the adult bears, I think, is a study in how bears have found success, because they might still be apt to push their boundaries and make new discoveries, yet they've established their home ranges, they've developed knowledge and skills necessary to make a living. Some wild bears can live more than 30 years. So Jen, let's highlight a few of the adult bears that you have been watching or are looking forward to watching this year.
Well, we know Foso will be single this year because she had a cub last year, and she's a super chill bear, as this video. She often just lays on this stump and scratches. I've seen this more than once, her doing that. And it's just hilarious. She's a fairly good sized bear, but she's very chill, which is nice. And then one of our guides has also seen Scuba Sue already. She's our most popular bear since she dives fully under the water when she fishes, and it's an impressive sight. So I'm hoping one day she has cubs that take after her and learn to dive as well, so we could have a whole contingent of diving bears, but so far that hasn't happened. One of the commenters on the live cam joked that, because at Katmai, there's a Scuba Steve, I think, that also dives. And so they were saying we should try to get them together at some point, Scuba Steve and Scuba Sue, to get them getting some scuba cubs. But I think that would be too far, taking a little too far. And then some of our male bears, we have our, like I said, they're mainly black bears. We don't have any brown bears that we know of fully, but most of our black bears are gentle giants. Some of them who just go about their day but don't really push others out of the way. Doobie's a fairly popular guy. He just sits on his rock literally all day. Sometimes he fishes, sometimes he just sits with his mouth open all the time. he just sits and chills. He's very cute. And then we have BB, who's one of our favorites. He's quite the gentleman. He likes to sit at a table when he eats. Sometimes he goes up to this rock table and he'll sit like he's at a picnic table. And I saw him once after he'd eaten a lot of fish on the same table. He took his paw and wiped the whole table clean, so he would have a clean surface with which to eat. And he also was the one that let little Nugget take his leftovers when Nugget was struggling for fish. And so that was nice to see. This is in contrast to Wade, who often picks fights and will push others off even when he's not actively fishing. He ends up with a lot of scars and scratches from fights. He starts just from pushing this weight around. Like this video, he was sleeping and he woke up just to move another bear off, catch a fish just to show how easy it was, and then drop it. Like he's just, you know, he's not a jerk, but he looks, some of the things he does lend to be that.
Yeah, sometimes bears just can't turn it off. They're like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm going to do it, even though I don't need to do it right now. And every bear that we see at Anan shows us different ways of making a living, different ways to stay determined when they face difficulties or challenges, different ways that they find success. Every bear here also experiences life within a hierarchy, which has a great influence on bear behavior and the relationships between bears. And this is something, Jen, that we definitely wanted to talk about, because it's this very interesting dynamic where you have black and brown bears competing for the same places to fish. And we did have some audience questions that came in pretty early in our program today about that. So just representative questions. I think we'll try to answer these as we're talking, but somebody was wondering, do the brown and black bears conflict? And somebody else was wondering, so when do the brown and black bears share the fishing spot or stream? And have there been instances where the two different species may commingle if some of the sows are still possibly estrus? And since Anan Creek can attract both brown and black bears, do you find that they are compatible when they encounter one another, or do they defer to one another? So we know our audience is thinking about this, Jen. And a hierarchy for bears, simply put, is, I'd like to define it as a system of resource allocation and conflict resolution. In general, bigger bears attain higher positions in the hierarchy. So if you're a big adult male, you probably have easier access to productive fishing spots. If you're a small, young subadult bear like Twerp was a couple of years ago, you can't compete physically with the larger bears, so you're low in their hierarchy. You got to consider alternatives to avoid risk and danger. And then position in the hierarchy is earned too. Sometimes it's earned by large body size. Sometimes it's earned through combat. Sometimes it's earned by bluff. But ultimately, it leads to less overall conflict because it establishes this set of rules between bears. And it's at Anan, though, there's another layer to it because you have these two different species, Jen, that are working to fish in the same place.
Yeah, so like with this hierarchy and this set of rules, bears don't have to fight every time they meet. They already kind of know who outranks them. And sometimes they may have an exchange where they're kind of solidifying that, but this prevents them from getting in all-out brawls and physical confrontations, which could cause injuries that can be life-threatening in the wild. And so sometimes they'll just kind of move off if they realize they're outmatched, or subordinate bears will sometimes scan the area, and if there's larger bears down at the fishing hole, they'll kind of move away. And this kind of staggered access allows many of the bears to use the same river without constant conflict. And then the bigger bears can catch a lot of fish quickly and leave scraps for the littler bears. And then in general, brown bears, due to their larger size, they are more dominant over the black bears. So you'll often see suddenly like black bear will run away, and then you kind of look around and it's because they, like this video, it's because you'll then see a brown bear come up. And sometimes they'll just stay where they are. It depends on the black bear. So they will sometimes fish. You'll see them kind of casting a wary eye to make sure that the brown bear is okay with them staying there. But if it is, then they just both end up fishing. And a lot of times brown bears will fish in a little bit deeper of pools than the black bears will. So they kind of have room for both. And then definitely the black bears utilize the caves a bit more. And you'll see black bears evolved mostly in forested environments where climbing trees are kind of their escape strategies. So they'll go that way. Whereas brown bears were in open terrain. So they evolved to stay on their ground and be more confrontational, as you see here. And so it's kind of a case of environment shaping behavior, and then behavior then shaped dominance. But then there's also individual differences. So it's not always that a black bear will run off from a brown bear. That's usually what will happen. But last year we had Arrow push off 2 separate brown bears, which we were shocked by, especially because Arrow has an injured back leg. So he's an injured black bear. So 2 strikes, you would think, would prevent him from backing off a brown bear. But it was on 2 separate occasions, 2 separate brown bears. He was able to steal the fishing spot and the fish from the brown bear. So that was a surprise for all of us, but that just shows how individual personality can shape the dominance dynamics as well.
Many of our viewers are familiar with the brown bear cams at Brooks River in Katmai National Park. There, bears fish along the entire river, but activity is especially concentrated at Brooks Falls in early summer. And that creates a circumstance where bears frequently compete over the same fishing spots. How might the dominance interactions between bears play out along Anan Creek, where there are falls and rapids, but the river is structured differently? You've talked about like how bears learn to use like the cave areas. Maybe some prefer that. Maybe some can fish in shallower areas. Some can use deeper areas. So it seems like they're able to figure out and partition themselves into these little specific niches.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it, that there's different spots and they all have different fishing techniques. So some do the belly flop, which require like a little bit deeper of pools. The brown bears don't mind a deeper pool to have to fish in. Scuba actually likes that because then she's diving all the way under. And so there's shallower areas and there's a lot of kind of nooks and crannies that they can kind of go in. So like these large boulders separate them in some ways, even though they're fishing in the same areas. So it gives them a lot of opportunity to fish in different ways and fish next to each other, but not right next to each other. And there's also caves, which provide cover for the black bears. I've never actually seen the brown bears, even a smaller brown bear, go into the caves. But the black bears always stash their cubs, stash their food. They go in there to eat. One time there was a black bear who had gone into one of the caves to eat, and a brown bear ended up coming into the area and fishing right in front. And the poor black bear was stuck in the cave, and you could see him poke his nose out and then pull it back in because he would see that the brown bear was still there. And then every once in a while he'd poke his nose back out and then be like, oh. And then he finally did end up getting out, and the brown bear didn't care. I think the black bear just didn't know if the brown bear would care, but it was like he kind of sidled out and the brown bear was like, whatever, I don't care. But it was kind of funny to watch at the time.
And, we can't ignore female bears in the hierarchy either. Male bears, again, they play no role in raising offspring. So I don't think really they have a good idea of family lineages, but a mother knows her daughter and a grandmother might know her grandbears in the river. There's evidence from elsewhere in North America that is true. So I'm wondering about how females are sorting out their differences at Anan. And maybe, do you see any evidence of matrilines as has been documented elsewhere?
It's hard for us because we're not out there for a long time. So we don't even know some of the lineages, but the ones that we do, we've tried to see if they act differently towards the ones that we know are their cubs or former cubs. And we haven't noticed all that much difference between how they act with other bears. A lot of our females, especially the ones that are more dominant because they're older, they kind of hold their hierarchy, but not in the same way that some of the males do. So they don't assert their dominance in that way. They're just kind of afforded a little extra room, but it's not dominant in the same way. I don't see as many fights unless they have cubs. Then they're a little more aggressive in protecting their area. But for the most part, I've never seen them have altercations for fishing spots or anything like that. The one thing I would say, Scuba Sue, we do know who her mom was, and she was a pretty dominant bear. And Scuba has that in her as well. She was infamous for some negative encounters. But I never saw, from what I've heard, Bonnie didn't really confer that much difference onto Scuba Sue after a while, after she's grown up.
And I have one more question for you, Jen, about bears. And we got to get back to salmon with about like the 8 minutes left in our program. But let's, not forget, you mentioned it before, bears are working in preparation towards winter. I know in the Northern Hemisphere, we're just past the summer solstice, so we don't really want to think about winter, at least most of us don't. But the bears are working really hard to get fat for winter hibernation. So can you kind of walk us through the timeline of the active season for bears in the Anan Creek area?
Yeah, so we usually don't get out there until May or June just because the winter season, we have to boat out there. But when we're out there in May and June doing trail work and cleanup, we do see the bears out there sporadically eating scut cabbage and sedge grass and scraping barnacles off rocks, which seems super painful and a lot. But so we're not really seeing them at the deck. We're seeing them around the area. They're kind of working their way in. And then when the fish come in July and August, that's of course their most active and numerous, and there's berries around at this time. And then oddly, as if they know, it's like right at the end of August, they all kind of move off. They go further into the forest where we can't really see them, probably eating more berries. The brown bears are going to higher elevations where they're gonna make a den. So they kind of timed right at the end of August. And some of them will come and work their way around. And we do see them around in September and October, but not in the numbers. Even if there's still fish left in the creek, they still have moved off. It's like they've gotten their fill and they moved to a different area.
Well, the season ahead promises to showcase stories of bears and salmon in ways that we know about and in ways that we haven't anticipated. A major point of variability every year is the longevity and abundance of Anan Creek salmon run. And forecasting a salmon run is an imprecise science, so there's a lot of uncertainties, even with the best of forecasts. And but we had somebody at the very beginning of our program, I think one of the very first questions that we got, that was wondering about the projected salmon count for this area this year. This person wrote in, is the projected salmon count known for this area? And then I was kind of wondering, what might we expect to see regarding pink salmon runs in Southeast Alaska and Anan Creek this summer?
Yeah, so last year the fish were super late compared to what we've normally seen. They didn't begin trickling in until about July 11th. and they didn't appear in large numbers until about a week later on the 18th. Usually, I think I said earlier, they show up at the end of June and the beginning of July. And with this year, we have transitioned into an El Nino, which was just very recent, actually. And they're predicting that it might be possibly a super El Nino, and that could raise the water temperatures 1 to 3 degrees, which could be, we don't really know, it could be pretty bad, especially in the freshwater as they're trying to return. Earlier, I was talking about dissolved oxygen levels, and with warmer water, there's less available oxygen in the water for them to extract. And unfortunately for Anan Creek, there's no specific data for just that creek, but Fish and Game, the state of Alaska, they do forecast how many salmon are expected in general for the region. And the escapement is how many salmon will travel beyond the bay into salmon habitat. I like to think of it as like the adult salmon have escaped all of their predators, and now they've made it to their spawning grounds so that they can spawn for future generations of salmon to return. Over time, the Anan Creek return has been on a slight downward trend. And usually the pink salmon has an odd and even year trend for their returns, but at Anan, there are 3 different runs. So it isn't a huge drop in the different years like there would be on other streams that have just one run for like odd and even years.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because some streams have a big difference between an odd year run and an even year run. Like one will be huge and one will be nothing, and that's pretty common in other places with pink salmon. So thanks for dropping that info in. And I love watching bears and salmon. I love watching their determination, and we're going to get to see that every day at Anan Creek. Jen, with just a couple of minutes left, Anan Creek is open for determined people who want to experience it in person. So real quick for them, could you summarize some of the most important things that they should consider?
Yeah, so to get to Anan, most people take a boat from Wrangell or a float plane from Ketchikan. We've also had some people who have arrived by kayak, which is pretty impressive. Permit season, when you need a daily pass, is from July 5th to August 25th. Before and after those times, you don't need a permit. You can just show up. And this coincides roughly with the salmon run. So, and if you have your own boat or plane, there are 12 independent, unguided passes available each day during the permit season on recreation.gov. So you just get your permit there. If you don't have a boat or your own float plane, then you can book a guided tour, which gets you transportation with the passes. And there are 60 passes, guided passes available each day. So you do need to plan ahead for these because they do sell out. And if you go to the Friends of Anan website or the Forest Service Tongass webpage, you'll be able to find the list of guides that are permitted to bring visitors to Anan. So there's a lot of guide boat companies in Wrangell that you can go through, or if you happen to be in Ketchikan, you can try the float plane companies.
And how else can people get involved? Let's say you're like me and you're not planning on visiting Anan this year. How can they get involved in the experience?
I'm definitely watching on the live cams. Anan is for everyone, and we want everyone to be able to experience it. And that's one of the reasons we pushed really hard to get a live stream, because not everyone can make it up to Alaska. I used to live in New York City, and I thought that's the closest I was ever going to get to watching bears. But then I changed my life and reverted. But for those who can't, and if you are watching the cams, be on the lookout, because we're going to do a bingo game for what you're seeing on screen with the Friends of Anan. And then later on, we'll have the Anan Bear Awards and be voting for Best Bear, maybe. And then we are finishing up the Bear ID book from last season, and we'll be posting that. So You can follow along at home and try to figure out which bear you might be seeing, although we have a lot of bears that haven't been identified yet, either because they're there too quickly or because they don't have any signifiers that are easily identified enough. But so yeah, if you follow the Friends of Anan accounts, Explore, and the Forest Service Tongass Facebook page, they'll have posts throughout the season about stuff that's happening out here.
And one final question for the both of you, if you can just answer it maybe in a couple of sentences. What is one thing that you're looking forward to seeing at Anan Creek as the bear and salmon activity begins this year?
I would say it's hard to say one thing, but I'm definitely looking forward to seeing all the familiar furry faces. And I just love being out at Anan. But I guess I'm most excited to see all the little cubs, hopefully brown bear cubs soon.
Yes. I am looking forward to the return of the fish, of course. Every year I'm just always amazed at the journey that salmon have undertaken throughout their entire lives, being so small and susceptible as juveniles in a stream, going out to the big wide ocean and making their way back. It's truly amazing. That's what I'm looking forward to, seeing them fish come back and doing their thing.
It's hard to top those answers, so I won't try to do it. I do want to thank our production staff for this program, everyone at Explore.org, our camera operators and volunteer camera or website moderators. And then I want to thank, of course, Jen and Anna for their time. Thanks so much for being here today. I learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to the bear season at Anan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At the beginning of the program, I asked, what does success look like for bears and salmon? I hope you'll consider that question as you watch the webcams at Anan Creek this summer. Look for these amazing animals to use all their determination and to succeed in what can be a very challenging environment. My name is Mike Fitz with Explore.org. Have a good day, everybody. And as we like to say at Explore, never stop learning.